Disclaimer, this is not financial or investment advice, but please like and subscribe if you find this video to be helpful. So today, we're going to explore how Claude AI in Excel can help us with financial analysis. And in this scenario, as you can see on the right-hand side, I've already downloaded Claude AI, and it's basically like a chat box similar to ChatGPT, where you tell it what you want. And in this case, I've asked Claude AI to grab historical financials, but also forecast 5 years forward for Paramount. And I've just decided to use Paramount given the recent acquisition story behind Netflix, Paramount, and Warner Bros. As many of you would have seen, Netflix recently put in a bid for $30 per share of Warner Bros. And Paramount came back on top at $31. Since then, I believe Netflix has dropped out, and Paramount is now the preferred bidder, chosen by the Warner Bros. Board as well. And so you can see here, when prompted Claude AI, it actually shows you how it is thinking through the process, and it's already beginning to lay out the pipes or the skeleton of the model in Excel. And I think the one thing that really surprised me here is that Claude AI did a lot better than what I thought. And this is coming from an investment banking perspective, where there is a lot of emphasis on formatting and sourcing the financials that you are grabbing. And so you can see here, it's starting to footnote and source where it's getting the numbers from. The numbers are being perfectly formatted, so you can see that the negative numbers are in brackets. And it does take a while. I'm not sure if this will improve over time, but Claude AI does certainly take a bit longer. And you'll notice that on the lower right-hand corner, I'm using Optus 4.6, which is the more complex foundational model that is being run. And the ask was basically grab the 3 statements: income statement, balance sheet, and cash flow. I believe what it's doing is that it's going into the SEC filings of Paramount and grabbing those financials. Before it started forecasting, it did ask me to confirm how I would like the approach to be for forecasting. And I just said use average historicals, which is something that we will need to change later on. I've also requested Claude AI to build an assumptions tab, as well as a DCF. And so you can see I'm starting to flick through. So you can actually flick through the tabs and look at what it's doing in real time. And this won't interrupt or disrupt Claude AI's formatting. I've also skipped a few moments in the video, just given that Claude AI does take a bit of time. And just to save everybody's time, I've removed this forward. In terms of pricing, it is not cheap. It is currently on a monthly subscription, and I think there's only 2 tiers. I think it's something like maybe 25 or 30 USD a month at the moment for the cheapest subscription. I do note that you will start to hit usage limits pretty quickly if you ask Claude AI sophisticated questions, which did happen when I was testing a few prompts at the start. And here you can see I've only told it to build a DCF, but it's gone ahead to also build not only the breakdown, but also an implied share price, as well as a sensitivity table. And then now what I'm doing is I'm asking Claude AI to actually grab Warner Bros. Financials and overlay the transaction structure of Paramount's bid to acquire Warner Bros. just to see what it would output for me. And you can see here it's starting to think about M&A analysis, and it's building that out. And at the bottom of the tab, you can see it's got a standalone Warner Bros. Financial spreadsheet as well. And it's only taken the key items, which I guess is sufficient for a simple analysis. And within the M&A analysis here, I was looking around when it was building this out. You could see that it was taking, the approach it took was it had all the assumptions up top for the transaction, and then it built out the standalones and overlaid a cost synergy line item, which we'll look into later. Then I put in an extra prompt to get it to build, I guess, an assumption or scenario selector sheet, basically where you would have multiple scenarios and be able to toggle between them. I think this is something you will see later here, where Claude AI didn't really get the right output in the first go. I'm sure with a few prompts, you could get it to match exactly what you would want. And so here, what Claude AI has done is it's given a base, bull, and bear scenario. And so obviously to check its work, what I've done is I've gone through and I've gone straight to the Warner Bros. Website to look for the announcement where they've announced the acquisition. So Paramount was going to issue new shares at 30, and it was also going to offer, it had an offer price of $31 per share. And I think what was really interesting was that the amount of borrowings it had at the bottom here, which was $54 billion, which is quite a bit of debt for the company, which I'll go into a bit later. And really here, this is where I started to actually take over manually to look at what could be fixed. And so obviously a few assumptions didn't make sense. Like as an investment banker, you would never model a negative growth business. Even at bare minimum, you would assume inflation. And so that's something I've gone in and fixed. And then I've just gone in to look at a few assumptions that it had made. And I noticed that there were a few links between the different sheets that were not being linked up, even though it had those numbers. For example, it had the standalone Paramount and Warner Bros. Financials, EBITDA, EBIT, and that wasn't being linked to the DCF or the M&A analysis. The same thing for the change in working capital. And so really just here, I'm just doing a human check just to see what was done incorrectly by Claude AI. But I would say that given I didn't give that many prompts to Claude AI, and on its first go, it managed to, I would say, build 70% of what you would expect for a simple model that you would pitch to a client just for marketing purposes. And I would say it got there for most of the items that you need. It would build you the model pipes, the skeleton of the model. It had everything perfectly formatted. It had sensitivity tables, and it made a few basic assumptions. I think where investment bankers would then tend to come in is to actually, or investors would do, is that they'll need to come in and actually overlay commercial judgment. And that's something that I think Claude AI is probably lacking with the few basic prompts. Now, it is possible to perhaps ask Claude AI to pretend that it was an investment banker with significant experience in the broadcasting area and see what that would do. And I think that would have been interesting to see if it had a unique take on how it would forecast each of the companies. And then looking at the share price here, obviously the implied share price here is quite different, and I think that's mostly to do with just rough assumptions being assumed by the Claude AI model. And using average historicals, there's nothing wrong with that. However, you would typically have a stronger commercials idea of where the business is going, rather than just saying historical performance is going to be the same for the forecast period. The forecast period is going to be the same as rather the forecast period is going to be the same as historical performance. And so you can see here when I was playing with the whack, it is quite sensitive, which is no surprise to anybody. Realized when I was looking through here that the offer price was a bit off. So for some reason, I'm not sure why, but Claude AI didn't pick up the latest share price. So that was something that was quite, I think, disappointing. But I did manage to change that. And then going through, I had a look at the number of shares, which it definitely had sort of rounded. But I think that was broadly like not a big issue. And then here, when I was going down into just checking the correct net debt figure was being pulled, just taking the latest that I could find. And then I think here on the actual transaction structure, this was where Claude AI maybe was just too recent. The announcement was too recent and it hadn't picked it up yet. But it was sort of wrong on the assumptions here. And so the transaction was going to be 47 billion in equity and 54 billion in debt. And that equity was going to be issued through a share issuance. And so I've made these changes on my end here where I've gone in and I've just put in the correct numbers. It did pick up the right synergy number and it actually applied a phasing, which is something that a banker would typically do on the job. And you can already see here with bare minimum changes, just pure model output from the Claude AI, that net debt to EBITDA is already quite high at 7.7 times. And it doesn't deleverage that much until like when you look at FY29, it's at 5.1 times. And that is still pretty high leverage. I think the next question I had in mind was, looking at the banks and the credit funds providing the loans. These are all investment banks as well as Apollo, and a 5.5% cost of debt assumed by Claude AI was definitely very low. And so looking at Gemini, it took 7%. Now, I think with 7%, this might still be pretty low, in my opinion, just given that it is a highly geared acquisition. And typically, LBOs carry a higher premium due to the increased risk that you are gearing up the business. Typically, corporates might be on the lower end towards 2 times, maybe even 3 times leverage. But out of the gates here, you're looking at 7 times, and it isn't really, you're really dependent on the synergies being realized here to deleverage. And the problem with synergies is that they're not 100% going to occur. It is a management guidance. It is a management forecast. Usually they don't go to plan. And in some cases, when they do occur and do actually achieve the cost synergies, you usually have other issues in the business which offset those synergies that you've gained. And it does, in some cases, it does compromise the business where you might actually lower the quality of the revenue or even the strategic moat of the business to some aspects. But here, when I was looking at this, you can see the deal is quite, from an EPS perspective, it is quite accretive for Paramount. I do note that being accretive on the EPS side doesn't necessarily make this a good deal, because EPS is obviously a very short-term outlook usually by management, but also in this case, you are gearing up significantly to achieve those EPS gains, which does get reflected, I guess, in the interest expense before it hits the NPAT and earnings per share. And so here you can see me building out this share issuance because I realized that during the EPS calculations, it wasn't, Claude AI didn't factor in the increase in issuance. And so you're getting an additional 3 million of shares, which should make the deal less accretive, although it does look very attractive. And then looking at the synergies side, it's interesting. Yeah, as you can see here, they're saying that they're valuing the business at 7.5 times. However, there's also additional 3.5 bill of bridging facilities, I think. So I just added that on as conservatism as well. And then, yeah, this is the assumptions sheet, which I don't think was done very well. So I just completely ignored that. Typically, we would have a much cleaner layout. So check out my other videos where I've built that out in the past. And yeah, that's pretty much it for this video. Taking a look at how Claude AI can actually help somebody analyze a business in a very simplistic and time efficient manner. Obviously, it's not perfect, but this is an early release of Claude AI in Excel. There will be other models being released. I think with the speed at how fast AI is developing right now, I wouldn't be surprised if this is going to continue to improve exponentially. And also, what does this mean for the banking profession as it is right now? I think this is something that will be a game changer for the industry, for the investment banking industry. Let me know in the comments below if you guys would like to learn more about the investment banking industry. Maybe I could do a video about that, and maybe around my thoughts around how AI could potentially impact that profession as well.